I'd like to look at a pair of poems by Phillis Wheatley. Everyone should have a handout here with both poems complete. But before, I'll give you a moment to review. But before I do, we should just talk a little bit about Phillis Wheatley. Is anyone meeting Phillis Wheatley for the first time today in these pages? Yeah. Okay.
No, I read it beforehand.
Okay. Right.
First time.
Fascinating. Yeah. So if you're new to Phillis Wheatley, absolutely one of the most fascinating early Americans. She was born probably what's now modern day Senegal around 1753, and taken about the age of 7, and sold into slavery in Boston in 1760. She was bought by the Wheatley family in Boston and renamed after the ship that transported her across the Middle Passage. She was an absolute genius. In 16 months, she learned the English language and then went on to learn Greek and Latin. By 1770, some 10 years after she had arrived in Boston, she achieved great renown with a published poem eulogizing George Whitefield. She was an incredibly popular poet and known poet in her lifetime. And in 1773, the Wheatleys took Phillis to London, where she published her first collection of poetry to great acclaim, though it was delayed when it reached the colonies. The Dartmouth, the ship that was carrying Wheatley's collected poems back for sale in the United States, was briefly held in Boston Harbor because it was carrying mostly tea. And it arrived on the eve of the Tea Party, and its cargo was held until that business had ended. But eventually it sold, and it sold well across the colonies. Today we're going to look at a couple of probably lesser known poems, but poems that have more to do with the business of war and the military. The first is a poem she wrote celebrating George Washington. And she sent him this poem in 1775 when he was encamped up near Cambridge. He replied to her the following February, apologizing for the delay in his reply and praising her poem, but saying he didn't want to publish it himself because he was afraid he'd be accused of vanity. Right? But it was a great poem. Thank you very much. And if she's ever around the army camp, stop by. I don't know if they met, but that wasn't the end of the story. So Washington is, of course, playing at this idea of, I'm so modest, right? I don't want anyone to think I'm vain. So he does the only decent thing and sends a copy of the letter that Wheatley wrote to him, along with a copy of his reply and the poem, to his secretary, and says, isn't this a great poem? I didn't want to publish it because I didn't want to be thought vain. And his secretary kind of got the hint. And the poem was published in several newspapers in 1776 eventually. And so that's to His Excellency General Washington. And then I'd like to just go ahead while we break to read another poem reflecting on the end of the war, called Liberty and Peace, and Wheatley's return to some of the same ideas and images that motivated her encomium on George Washington some years prior. So let's take a couple of moments, if you would please, read both poems, and then we'll come back together and see what jumps up.